It was 102 degrees the day my air conditioner went dead. Not broken dead. No fan, no hum, no cold air, just silence and heat so thick it clung to my skin like glue. I was standing in my living room, sweat trickling down my back when I saw her. Cheryl Jennings. Blonde bob. Oversized sunglasses. HOA clipboard like it was a badge from God himself. She was standing across the street, arms folded, watching my house like she personally cursed my thermostat. I stepped outside. "Cheryl," I called, already knowing I wasn't going to like what came out of her mouth. She sauntered over like she had all the time in the world. "Jonathan Vale, we sent you a notice. Your AC unit violates aesthetic compliance. It's too tall by," she squinted at her clipboard, 3 inches. I stared at her. "You shut off my power because of height. Not your power. Just your AC. We had an electrician isolate that line. Until you replace the unit with an HOA-approved model, it stays off. Section 12, paragraph 8. Are you serious right now? It's policy. You signed the charter." She turned and walked off like that was the end of it. I hadn't signed anything. My ex-wife had. But apparently that meant I was shackled to this nightmare HOA until death or foreclosure. That night, I barely slept. My dog was panting, I was drenched in sweat, and I kept replaying Cheryl's smug little monologue in my head. By morning, I'd had enough. Now I'm no genius, but I'm an electrician. I've wired half the houses in this town. I know how these circuits run, and I know every inch of this neighborhood's power grid, including the panel the HOA uses to power their clubhouse, their office, and poetically their own air conditioning. So I went for a walk, toolbox in hand, sunglasses on, just a guy doing routine maintenance. I bypassed the HOA's submeter and quietly looped my AC line into their grid. 10 minutes, clean job. No one saw a thing. By the time I got home and flipped the breaker, the cool breeze of justice was blowing out my vents. And that was just the beginning. By noon the next day, Cheryl was losing her mind. I watched from my garage as she paced in front of the HOA clubhouse, one hand shielding her eyes from the blazing sun, the other clutching a phone to her ear. Her hair, usually styled to within an inch of its life, had flattened against her scalp. The clubhouse windows were open, but the air inside must have been stifling. Those old buildings were ovens without central air. I didn't say a word. Just kept organizing my tool rack while nursing a cold bottle of water. The same air conditioner she'd tried to kill was now humming along beautifully, cooling my house better than it had in years. Around 2, another board member showed up. Rick something. I recognized him from the time they tried to fine me for parking my truck too close to the curb, whatever that meant. He was already sweating through his polo shirt as he unlocked the clubhouse door, only to recoil like he'd walked into a furnace. They stayed in there for maybe 5 minutes before storming back out, red-faced and arguing. Cheryl jabbed her finger toward the side of the building, probably demanding someone check the fuse box. I didn't need to worry. I'd done the job clean, no tampering, just a smart reroute that took advantage of their own sloppy wiring. That night, I started digging. I wasn't just looking to get even, I wanted to know exactly what kind of operation Cheryl was running. I remembered a guy who used to live 2 doors down, the one who suddenly moved out last fall. He'd been livid about some kind of back-charged landscaping fee, but then he just vanished, sold below market and disappeared. At the time, I thought he just gave up. Now, I wondered if he'd been pushed. I pulled up the county property records. Took 10 minutes to find a pattern. Over the past 3 years, 6 homeowners had sold their houses under sudden pressure from the HOA. All of them had documented disputes code violations that didn't exist, fines that ballooned overnight, threats of legal action. Most had sold to one of 2 LLCs. Guess who signed the purchase paperwork on behalf of both companies? Rick, the same board member now sweating bullets next to Cheryl. I cross-referenced the LLCs with the tax assessor's office. Both were listed under a shell corporation in Nevada. I called in a favor from an old Army buddy who worked in municipal procurement. Within 24 hours, He sent me a PDF showing that same shell corporation had secured a development grant from the city, a grant meant for community revitalization. In plain English, the HOA was forcing people out with bogus fines, buying their homes cheap through fake companies, then flipping the properties using taxpayer money. And Cheryl, she wasn't just the face of the HOA. She was on the board of the nonprofit that administered the city grant. I didn't sleep that night, not from the heat, but from the adrenaline. I had enough to light a fire under them, but I needed more. Photos, bank transfers, something undeniable, so I waited and watched. The next Saturday, the clubhouse parking lot filled up for the monthly board meeting. Normally closed door, no outsiders allowed, but I had an idea. I walked over with an envelope tucked under my arm and a GoPro clipped to my chest, hidden under my button-down shirt. Cheryl met me at the front door, her expression sour. "You're not on the agenda," she said, blocking the entrance. "I won't stay long," I said, holding up the envelope. "But if you don't let me speak, I'll take this straight to Channel 6. There are reporters already interested. Said your name sounded familiar." Her eyes twitched. She stepped aside. Inside, the clubhouse was barely cooler than outside. A few oscillating fans were set up, but they did nothing against the wall of heat. The board members were visibly uncomfortable, blotting their faces with napkins, sipping from lukewarm water bottles. I stood at the front and opened the envelope. "This is a list of 6 properties sold under suspicious circumstances," I began. "All in the last 3 years. All connected to fines levied by this board. All sold to corporations run through shell companies you, Rick, and Cheryl control." Rick opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'm not finished. These LLCs were awarded city development grants, public funds. And Cheryl, you're on the board of the nonprofit that distributes those grants." The room fell silent except for the whir of the fans. "I've got copies of the grant contracts, the property transfers, and the HOA violation notices. I've already sent digital versions to a local attorney who specializes in municipal fraud. He's very interested." Cheryl tried to regain control. "You've made your point. You're not allowed to speak out of turn." I pulled the GoPro from my shirt and held it up. "I've been recording this whole meeting, and I'm not the only one. I've shared everything with 3 neighbors who are just as tired of your abuse as I am. If anything happens to me, they'll go public." Rick pushed back from the table. "You hacked our power. That's a federal offense." "No, I rerouted my line through a community grid you failed to maintain." "There's no law against using shared infrastructure, especially when my line was cut without legal authority. But if you want to press charges, I'll be happy to explain it to a judge, right after I subpoena your bank records." The meeting broke down into chaos. One board member got up and left. Another demanded to see the documents. Cheryl sat with her arms crossed, but her leg bounced under the table. I walked out without another word. The next day, a uniformed officer knocked on my door, not to arrest me but to ask for a statement. Apparently, the city attorney's office had launched an investigation. Someone higher up had gotten wind of the grant discrepancies. My evidence had been forwarded to the relevant departments and they wanted more. I handed over everything. Within a week, subpoenas were issued. Cheryl tried to play it off, claiming everything was above board, but the paper trail didn't lie. The HOA office was closed indefinitely. The clubhouse was posted with a notice from the city, under administrative review. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. People who'd been scared to speak up started sharing their own stories. One woman revealed she'd paid over $10,000 in fake fines before finally giving up and moving in with her sister. Another couple admitted they'd been threatened with foreclosure over a supposedly unapproved mailbox. A community meeting was held at the park. This time there was no board, just neighbors, angry and motivated. We formed a temporary council, filed for a vote of no confidence, and started the process of dissolving the current HOA leadership. 2 weeks later, Cheryl's house was listed for sale. No goodbyes, no farewell note, just a moving truck and a for sale sign. That summer, temperatures hit record highs, but my house stayed cool. And for the first time in years, so did the neighborhood. I didn't expect the city to move fast. Government wheels tend to grind, not spin. But when someone on the city council realizes public grant monies being funneled through fake corporations masquerading as revitalization efforts, things get real serious, real fast. 3 mornings after the clubhouse was shut down, 2 unmarked sedans pulled into the neighborhood. Not the kind that scream FBI, but close enough in posture, tinted windows, clipped suits, and the kind of shoes that never scuff. They didn't knock on Cheryl's door. They taped a notice to it, same with Rick's. The paper was stamped with a court seal and a list of codes I didn't recognize, but I knew what it meant: asset freeze. I was on my porch pretending to trim back some hedges I didn't care about when one of them walked over. "You're Jonathan Vale?" he asked. I nodded, lowering the shears. "Appreciate your cooperation. We've got your files," he said, glancing toward the houses across the street. "Do you know if Miss Jennings keeps physical records anywhere off-site?" She had a storage unit on Canyon Road, behind the old car wash. I saw her unloading a trunk there a few weeks back. Boxes, files. Thought she was just hoarding HOA junk. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket and jotted something down. "That helps. We'll get a warrant." He didn't say what agency he was with, and I didn't ask. I didn't need to. The city investigation had climbed a few rungs. Later that afternoon, I found a folded note tucked into my storm door. It wasn't signed, just typed in all caps. "Thanks for ruining everything. This isn't over." No envelope, no fingerprints, and no one had seen who delivered it. I didn't bother calling the cops. I installed 2 more cameras instead, one covering the street, the other aimed at my driveway. I also started backing my truck in at night, just in case someone got any funny ideas about brake lines or sugar in the tank. The neighborhood wasn't quiet anymore. Not in the usual way. The air had shifted. People who used to avoid eye contact now waved. A few started stopping by not to gossip but to ask questions. "How did you even figure out what they were doing? What happens to our fines now? Is there anything we can do to help?" One guy, Dale, offered to host an open forum at his place. He used to be a union negotiator before retiring, said he'd help moderate. I agreed, but only if we held it in his backyard. I wasn't interested in being the face of anything. I just wanted people to know what had really been happening. That Saturday, 15 of us gathered under a string of lanterns and a canopy Dale's wife had set up. We brought lawn chairs, iced tea, and a stack of printed documents I'd compiled: violation patterns, sale records, the grant disbursement chain. I didn't talk much. I didn't need to. A woman named Lydia took over. She'd been fined repeatedly for having non-native plants in her front yard, plants that, it turned out, were on a list Cheryl had made up herself. Another guy, Marcus, revealed he'd been served with a lien notice that never appeared in any county filing. He paid anyway, just to keep his credit clean. Dale waited until the end, then stood up and said, "We've got enough for a civil suit, class action. Fraud, harassment, misappropriation of funds, it's all here." No one objected. We formed a committee on the spot. Not official, not legal, just a group of neighbors who'd finally had enough. One of them, Karen, had a brother-in-law who ran a litigation firm in the city. She offered to reach out. The next day, while I was replacing a busted sprinkler head, a patrol car rolled through the neighborhood for the first time in months. Not a casual drive by, either slow, deliberate, eyes scanning every window. It stopped in front of Cheryl's house. An officer got out, walked around the property, then knocked twice. When no one answered, he radioed in and waited. 10 minutes later, another cruiser arrived. This one had a detective in plain clothes riding shotgun. They didn't knock again. They used a key, one likely surrendered by court order, and stepped inside. They were in there for half an hour. When they came out, they carried a laptop, a ledger-style book, and a small safe. Everything went into the trunk without a word. The news broke that evening. Local station. A 2-minute segment buried near the end of the broadcast, but there it was. Homeowners Association in Crestwood Hills under investigation for financial misconduct and abuse of authority. Sources confirm the involvement of a city grant program and potential charges pending. They didn't name names not yet, but anyone who'd lived here more than a year knew. 3 days after the segment aired, Rick's house went dark. No lights, no cars, just a realtor's sign and a hastily mowed lawn. I checked the listing out of curiosity. As is, seller motivated. Translation: get out before the storm hits. The attorney Karen had contacted got back to us. He agreed to represent the group pro bono until damages could be assessed. He'd already filed a request for discovery and subpoenaed the HOA's bank records. I didn't know legal documents could be that satisfying to read, but the real surprise came in the form of a letter, not typed, handwritten, on thick city council stationery. It was from Councilwoman Ortega. She thanked me for bringing the situation to light, explained that the city had launched an internal audit of the grant program, and most importantly invited me to attend a public hearing the following month on community oversight reforms. I hadn't planned on getting involved with politics. I still didn't want to, but I agreed to show up. Not because I wanted the spotlight, but because I'd seen what happened when no one paid attention. The hearing was held downtown in a hall that smelled like paper and old coffee. Ortega gave a short speech about accountability, transparency, and the need to reform how HOAs interacted with municipal programs. Then she called on me. I kept it short. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an activist. I fix things for a living. Electrical, mostly. But when I saw what was going on in my neighborhood, I realized no one else was going to fix it unless someone flipped the switch. There was a pause. Not silence, just the kind of stillness that comes when people are really listening. Afterward, Ortega pulled me aside. "They're going to try to bury this," she said. "People like Cheryl, they always have friends in quiet places, but if we keep the pressure on, we can clean house." I nodded. "Just tell me where to aim." Back home, things began to settle. The HOA, now stripped of leadership, was placed under temporary receivership while the court reviewed its charter. Fines were frozen, pending violations voided. The lock on the clubhouse was changed, and Dale was appointed interim chair until a new vote could be held. I declined nominations. I'd done my part. That next weekend, the temperature hit 104. A brutal wave that sent most folks indoors by noon, but I had plans. I dragged a folding table into my driveway, set up an old box fan, and laid out a dozen extension cords offering free popcorn and cold drinks to whoever stopped by. Not a protest, not a celebration, just neighbors, finally cooling off in more ways than one. As the sun dipped low, Lydia pulled up a chair next to mine and said, "You know, if you hadn't rerouted that line, none of this would have come out." I didn't say anything. Just passed her a lemonade and turned the fan up a notch. We didn't need revenge. We'd already won. A week after the hearing, I was sitting on my porch, wrench in hand, fixing the busted armrest of an old metal chair when a black SUV with government plates rolled up to Cheryl's former house. The for sale sign was still up, tilted slightly from a recent gust of wind. But the house itself looked abandoned, blinds drawn, mailbox taped shut. A few weeds starting to grow through the cracks in the driveway. 2 men in plain suits stepped out, followed by a woman with a briefcase and a walkie clipped to her belt. They didn't knock this time. One of them pulled a small keycard from his pocket, scanned it at the side entrance, and the door clicked open. I didn't stare. I didn't need to. The rest of the neighborhood noticed too. Lydia, who had taken over managing communications for our ad hoc resident committee, stepped out from her porch and gave a slight nod toward me. No words, just confirmation that something big was moving. That evening, we got the call not from the city, not from Ortega's office, but from the district attorney. Karen's brother-in-law, the litigation attorney, had just gotten off a call with the DA's office. The investigation had turned up a second set of books meticulously kept, handwritten ledgers that showed years of off-the-record transactions. Not just fines and fees, but cash withdrawals, payments to contractors who didn't exist, and something that turned all our stomachs. Evidence of falsified foreclosure notices used to intimidate at least 3 elderly homeowners out of their properties. One of them had passed away 6 months ago. No heirs, no estate attorney, just a house that quietly changed hands through a too-convenient auction. That property, it turned out, had been sold 3 times in 8 months. Each time, the Shell Corporation made a tidy profit thanks in part to those city revitalization grants. The DA didn't mince words. Wire fraud, elder abuse, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. The charges were stacking up like bricks. That Friday, Rick was arrested outside a golf course in a neighboring county. He was mid-swing, apparently, when the sheriff's department walked up and cuffed him. Cheryl wasn't so easy to find. She'd skipped town 2 days earlier, but she hadn't wiped her tracks well enough. A financial trail led to a short-term rental under her sister's name in Arizona. Within 72 hours, she was in custody, being extradited under sealed charges. I should have felt triumphant. But it didn't land like that. The next neighborhood meeting wasn't celebratory. It was heavy. Dale opened with a moment of silence for the victims of the fraud, not just the ones who lost money, but the ones who lost their homes, their peace, their trust in the system. People brought photos of friends who'd moved away under pressure, stories of quiet humiliation they'd never shared before. Marcus, who had once been too afraid to speak up, stood and read a letter from his aunt, who'd been fined into bankruptcy and moved into assisted living. She hadn't known the fines weren't enforceable. She just assumed they had the right. It was sobering, but it also lit a fire. We voted to dissolve the HOA entirely, not reform it, not elect a new board. Dissolve it. We hired a property law firm to handle the process, filed the necessary paperwork with the county, and submitted the dissolution to the state registry. It took a month, but the charter was revoked. The HOA was no longer a legal entity. That didn't mean things went back to chaos. If anything, we were more organized than before. A volunteer committee was formed to handle common area upkeep. We paid a local landscaping company directly, rotating point of contact responsibilities each quarter. No dues, just transparent contributions. No fines, just reminders and neighborly courtesy. The clubhouse, once the nerve center of Cheryl's empire, was seized by the county as part of the restitution process. Ortega pushed through a proposal to turn it into a community resource center, free tutoring, job training, and a cooling station during heat waves. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I was approached twice about running for city council. I said no both times. I wasn't interested in politics. I was interested in wiring things that worked. But I did agree to consult on a new ordinance. Ortega introduced one that required full transparency for any HOA operating within city limits and granted homeowners the right to audit finances annually, without exception. The ordinance passed unanimously. Lydia eventually became the unofficial voice of the neighborhood. She organized monthly potlucks, started a shared tool library, and got a community garden approved for the vacant lot on the corner, the one Cheryl had tried to turn into a decorative gravel park. We planted tomatoes, basil, and sunflowers instead. I never heard directly from Cheryl again. But her trial was public. I watched part of it from the back row of the courtroom. Her attorney tried to argue that she was just following precedent, that the system was flawed, not her intentions. But the prosecution had those ledgers, and more damning. They had video of her coaching board members on how to encourage surrender from difficult homeowners. The jury didn't take long. She was sentenced to 16 years, with eligibility for parole after 10. Rick got 9. The others pled out for lighter sentences and community service, most banned from holding leadership positions in any housing association for life. The restitution fund, funded by asset seizure and court-ordered penalties, was enough to repay the worst of the fines. Not all, but enough to make a difference. The homes that had been flipped were placed in a recovery trust, with tenants offered the option to repurchase at original rates. 2 families returned. One didn't want to come back. Couldn't blame them. As for me, I kept my AC running, my circuits clean, and my cameras up, not out of paranoia, just habit. The heat wave passed eventually. Temperatures dropped, but we stayed alert. One evening, a teenager from down the block walked up while I was fiddling with my truck's tailgate. He had a flyer in hand, part of a school project about civic engagement. He asked if I'd ever seen anything that proved one person could make a difference. I told him. It wasn't just one person, it was all of us. I just happened to flip the right switch. He nodded like he understood, then asked if I'd sign his flyer. I laughed and did. That night, I sat on my porch with the same chair I'd fixed, watching the sun settle behind rooftops that no longer felt like battlegrounds. The air was warm but not stifling, the kind of quiet that didn't feel heavy anymore. And in that stillness, I heard something I hadn't noticed for a long time: laughter. From a few houses down, kids running through sprinklers, neighbors chatting over fences, someone playing an old radio near their garage. The sound of a neighborhood cooling off for real this time. No boards, no fines, no power games, just people living.